Hello everyone, this is Pastor Joe with Sea Life Ministries, and today we're going to continue in our study in the book of Philippians. So let's start off with verse 12. But I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. Now when Paul talks about the things which happened to me, Paul's difficult circumstances, namely his journey to Rome and imprisonment there, is what he was talking about. And when he said for the furtherance of the gospel, it's better translated for the progress, which refers to the forward movement of something, often of armies, in spite of obstacles, dangers, and distractions. Paul's imprisonment proved to be no hindrance to spreading the message of salvation. And then in verse 13, where he talks about his chains are in Christ, people around him recognized that Paul was no criminal, but had become a prisoner because of preaching Jesus Christ and the gospel. And then when it says palace guard, another translation on that is praetorium, which is a special building, for example, a commander's headquarters, emperor's palace, or the group of men in the imperial guard. Because Paul was in a private house in Rome, palace guard probably refers to the members of all the imperial guard who guarded Paul day and night. And when he mentions all the rest, he was talking about everyone else in the city of Rome who met and heard him speaking. It wasn't really thrown in there to make sure that he didn't leave anyone out. Now, in verse 14, and most of the brethren in the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ even from envy and strife, and some also from goodwill. The former preach Christ from selfish ambition, not sincerely supposing to add affliction to my chains, but the latter out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. Much more bold to speak, Paul's example of powerful witness to the gospel as a prisoner demonstrated God's faithfulness to his persecuted children, and their imprisonment would not halt the progress of the gospel. This encouraged others to be bold and not fear imprisonment. And I can remember going to the movies when I was a kid, and you'd come out, and if it was a karate movie, on the way out you were a black belt, and you were walking tall and shoulders back and ready to take on the world. And I believe that here it's similar. And when you go hear a good speaker, when you walk out, a lot of times the first thing on your mind is, oh, I want to do that, I can do that, which in this case would be a really good thing to be or have confidence in preaching the word. And then he mentions in verse 15, and some also from goodwill. Goodwill speaks of satisfaction and contentment, the attitude that Paul's supporters had for him personally and for his ministry. And then when he talks about selfish ambition, this describes those who were interested only in self-advancement or who ruthlessly sought to get ahead at any cost. Paul's detractors used his incarceration as an opportunity to promote their own prestige by accusing Paul of being so sinful the Lord had chastened him by imprisonment. And then where he talks about not sincerely, it's similar to the word sincere in verse 10, which really means genuine, because Paul's preacher critics didn't have pure motives. And in verse 17, but the latter out of love, Paul's supporters were motivated by genuine affection for him and confidence in his virtue. And when he says that he was appointed for the defense of the gospel, the Greek word there describes a soldier being placed on duty. Paul was in prison because he was destined to be there by God's will, so as to be in a strategic position to proclaim the gospel. Verse 18, what then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is preached, and in this I rejoice, yes, and will rejoice. I will rejoice. Paul's joy was not tied to his circumstances or his critics. He was glad when the gospel was proclaimed with authority, no matter who received credit. He endured the unjust accusations without bitterness at his accusers. Rather, he rejoiced that they preached Christ even in a pretense of godliness. And I like the way it says Paul's joy was not tied to his circumstances, because in the Gospels, Jesus himself mentioned that he has come that our joy may be full. And, again, it's not supposed to be tied to our circumstances or what's going on around us. Knowing that Christ died for us and we are going to heaven, that in and of itself is why we should have joy constantly and consistently. So actually, I'd like to turn our attention to John chapter 15, and let's start with verse 9, and let's go through 11. Verse 11, these things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. So if you go up to, let's start with verse 9, as the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. So if we abide in his love, and basically in him, that's when our joy may be full. Again, circumstances should not denote whether or not our joy is full. That you can say about happiness, but that's a different sermon. So I think we will conclude this for today's study. Thank you very much for joining us, and God bless you.